Hey guys, now that we are officially in the month of October, I'll be updating my prediction for the 2022 Senate elections. The midterms really are fast approaching. We are only 36 days out, and these Senate elections are still more competitive than they have ever been. Both parties truly have a very good chance at capturing that majority, and so in this video, I'll be going over my ratings for every single Senate election on this map, and of course, which party will eventually win control of the United States Senate in just a month. So even though we have 35 races on the map, not all of them are going to be highly competitive. In fact, some races are going to be very solid for either one party. And so I'm going to start off by filling in the solid states, and I will be staying true to the 15% threshold, meaning that a candidate will have to win by 15% for a race to be considered solid. And so this will include most solid Democratic states. The notable exception is the state of Washington, where Patty Murray is in a surprisingly close election. While for Republicans, they have an even longer list of solid states, as they simply have more incumbents running for re-election this year. Both Senate elections in Oklahoma are going to be solid for the GOP, and I also do have Missouri as a solid Republican state. Eric Schmidt and Trudy Valentine are both pretty generic candidates, and considering that Missouri really has taken a big turn to the right, it is not surprising to see that Missouri is probably going to vote in favor of the GOP by a solid margin. And then finally, we have the state of Alaska, where Lisa Murkowski and Kelly Tshibaka, the top two candidates, are both Republicans. And so now we have 13 toss-up races left. However, there are still 3 more elections that just aren't going to be that close, even though the margins are going to be slightly under 15 points. So the first one, the most obvious one, is of course the election in Washington, where Patty Murray is seeking her 5th term in office, and she leads by 10 points in the polls against Tiffany Smiley. However, she is already guaranteed to win, as she won a majority in the blanket primary. So that means that if every single voter that voted against Patty Murray in that primary votes for Tiffany Smiley, Murray would still win. And so even though she's pretty much guaranteed to a 5th term now, the margin, I don't think, is going to be as solid as it was in 2016. Democrats simply aren't in as strong of a position nationwide. Next up, in the state of Utah, Mike Lee is running for re-election to a 2nd term, and in 2016, he was elected by 41%. Now, he's only up by 7 points against conservative independent Evan McMullin. Now, the Democratic Party did something very smart here. Instead of nominating their own candidate, they chose to endorse McMullin, and so now McMullin, with the support of the Utah Democratic Party, really is giving Lee a run for his money. And so Utah is going to be the 2nd likely state on this map, but it will still go to the GOP. And even if McMullin wins, he is likely to caucus with the Republicans, as of course he is still a pretty conservative independent. And the final state that is going to be likely, just technically because of the margin, is going to be the state of Iowa, where Chuck Grassley is seeking his 8th term in office, and as he's gotten older, he has seen his margins to re-election shrink, and now it's gone down to just 7.3% according to the polls. Michael Franken is a former Navy Vice Admiral, and he really is making this race very competitive. This is probably the most competitive election that Chuck Grassley has been in since his first one all the way back in 1980, and so this will make Iowa the 3rd likely state on our map. And now the map looks a bit more normal to us, 45-45 for both parties with the 10 toss-up elections. These are really the states that could truly go both ways, although it is more likely in some states than others. And so I'm going to start off in Colorado and then move in increasing order of competitiveness. So starting off in Colorado, Michael Bennet is seeking his 3rd full term in office after being re-elected to a 2nd term in 2016 and winning his first election in 2010. Joe Adea is the Republican challenger. He is a pretty moderate Republican. He did not receive the support of Donald Trump or any Trump-like figures, but he still did come out on top by a 10-point margin in the Republican primary, and Joe Adea, I think, is the best candidate Republicans could have chosen, but Colorado simply is too blue of a state. Michael Bennet leads by 9.3% in the polls and has been up by double digits in many of the most recent surveys. Even the Trafalgar Group has Michael Bennet leading by 6%. I think in the end it'll be around a 7 to 8% margin for the Democratic incumbent, making Colorado a likely state for the Democratic Party. 538 currently gives him a 92% chance at winning re-election. So Colorado is going to go to the Democrats by a likely margin. Next up, we have a race that looked like it was going to be fairly competitive for quite a while, but is now a race the Democrats have a pretty solid chance of winning in now, and that is the race in New Hampshire between Maggie Hassan and Don Bolduc. Hassan was elected to the Senate, defeating incumbent Kelly Ayotte in 2016. It was a margin of just a little bit over 1,000 votes, one of the closest Senate elections in U.S. history, but Maggie Hassan did pull off a very impressive win last time, and she's going to win by a significantly larger margin this time. For a while, it looked like Chris Sununu might actually challenge Maggie Hassan, and if he did, he probably would have won. Chris Sununu is the very popular Republican governor of New Hampshire, but instead of running for the Senate, he has chosen to run for a fourth term as the state's governor. So Maggie Hassan, without Chris Sununu as one of her challengers, is now in a much better position, and Don Bolduc has made himself a very weak challenger to Maggie Hassan. Don Bolduc has literally gone out and said that Donald Trump won the 2020 presidential election, and in a state that Joe Biden carried by 7.4%, that message is not going to rub off too well. And so right now, Maggie Hassan leads by 7.5% in the polls. Her lead has expanded after she won officially the Democratic nomination, and Bolduc officially became the Republican nomination in a close race against Chuck Morse, and 538 gives Hassan an 86% chance at winning re-election. So New Hampshire is going to be the third likely Democratic state on this map. And now we're going to move on to a race that Republicans are probably going to win for a third time in a row, with Marco Rubio as the incumbent. Rubio is now running for his third term, and in 2016, he was reelected by 8 points after losing the Republican primary for president to Donald Trump. Val Demings was always going to be the Democratic nominee in this race. Nobody was going to beat her, and so she now is officially the challenger to Marco Rubio, and this race really has gone a lot more competitive over the last couple of months. For quite a while, Rubio was actually leading by some pretty solid margins, double digits, sometimes even 20 points in some earlier polls, but now Marco Rubio's lead has shrunk down to just 3.8%, and this lead has been pretty consistent over the last couple of months. Marco Rubio is not doing as well as he was before, but I do still expect him to win his re-election, and I do think he will do that by a margin over 5%. Polls in Florida have been known to underestimate Republicans like they did in 2020 and 2018. In 2018, Bill Nelson was defeated by Rick Scott, who won by 0.1%, with basically every single poll, though, showing that Bill Nelson was going to win his fourth term. So Republicans really have taken a pretty big lead in Florida, and of course, with Trump's win in 2020, the state is not as competitive as it was before, and so that's why Marco Rubio is on track to winning his third term in the U.S. Senate. In the state of Wisconsin, this race also looked like it was going to be pretty close for quite a while after Mandela Barnes first won the Democratic nomination, just like New Hampshire, but now things are turning around for Ron Johnson. He was down by 3.8% in the polls at one point, but now he's taken a lead and is now ahead by 1.9%, and basically all of the most recent polls have shown Ron Johnson to be the preferred candidate. The two-time incumbent is probably going to win his re-election. He won despite being behind in the polls in 2016, and so Mandela Barnes really is going to have to take a pretty significant lead in the polling here if, Ron Johnson is going to lose, and right now it does not look like that's going to happen. Ron Johnson is not a popular senator and really not that great of a candidate. He also has an investigation against him where he tried to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election using fake electors. That investigation, I don't think, is going to conclude anything by the time the midterms arrive in November, but Ron Johnson, even though he's not the greatest candidate, is still looking like he's on track to winning his third full term in office after defeating Russ Feingold in both 2010 and 2016. And so Wisconsin, even though it did vote for Joe Biden in 2020, it was by a very small margin. I believe that Republicans do now have the slight advantage in the state, even though Wisconsin was a part of the Blue Wall for almost 3 decades. And so at this point, Wisconsin is going to be a lean Republican state on our map, and the first lean state that I've gone over so far. Next up, in Arizona, we have a must-win race for Democrats. The Democratic Party cannot win a majority for a second time in a row without capturing this seat again. Mark Kelly won by 2.3% in 2020 in that special election and is now running for his first full term. This was a seat previously held by John McCain, and then John Kyle, and then Martha McSally, and now Mark Kelly. And that's because Doug Ducey got to appoint both Kyle and McSally, and then McSally eventually lost to Mark Kelly in 2020. So Mark Kelly is a pretty strong incumbent, and Blake Masters is a very weak Republican nominee. Mark Kelly is not impossible to defeat. If Republicans had chosen just any more of a generic candidate, they would have had a much better chance in this election. Arizona is still a very close state. Biden won it by 0.3% in 2020. However, in 2016, Trump still won Arizona by 3.5%. Arizona has a very long history of voting for Republicans, and so this was a winnable seat for the GOP, but with Blake Masters as their nominee, it is becoming unlikely. Mark Kelly leads by 7 points in the polls. His lead has been pretty stagnant over the last couple of months, and just like in 2020, I do expect Kelly to underperform his polling average, and I do think he will win by just around 3 to 4%. So not exactly what the polling currently is suggesting, but still a race the Democrats are heavily favored in. According to 538, Mark Kelly has an 83% chance at winning re-election. I don't think the margin is going to be over 5 points, though, as 538 says it's probably going to be. But right now, Arizona is going to be the first lean Democratic state on our map, and this is good news, as of course this is a state that Democrats must win if they want to hold on to control of the Senate. And now moving on to North Carolina, just like Arizona is a must-win for Democrats, North Carolina is a must-win for Republicans. The GOP cannot win back the Senate if they can't even hold on to the seat currently held by the retiring incumbent Richard Burr. And so with Richard Burr no longer running for his third term, we're seeing a very close election between Ted Budd and Cheri Beasley. Budd is a pretty generic Republican. He currently serves in the U.S. House, and Cheri Beasley is not too special of a Democrat either. She is the former North Carolina Supreme Court Chief Justice. So both of these nominees have been in a pretty close race, and the race really has tightened over the last couple of months. At one point, Budd was ahead by 5.4% in the polls. However, polling has shown time and time again that Democrats are favored and that polling in North Carolina is broken. Democrats are always oversampled, and that has been a big issue for their party as they poured millions of dollars into races in North Carolina and then would eventually lose them. We saw that, of course, in 2020, where Biden lost North Carolina by 1.3% despite winning Georgia. And then in 2020, we also had a Senate election where Cal Cunningham lost to Tom Tillis by 1.7 points, despite every single poll for that election showing that Democrats were going to win. 538 currently has North Carolina as a lean Republican state, and I do agree with that categorization. I think Ted Budd is going to win by around 4 to 5%. The last time that a Democrat won a Senate election in North Carolina was Kay Hagan all the way back in 2008 when Democrats won 59 seats. And now we're left with just 4 races, and both parties are still tied 48-48. And I think it's surprising to see that Ohio is among the 4 most competitive races. It really should be a likely GOP state, as solid for the Republicans as Florida. But J.D. Vance has made a mess of his campaign, and Tim Ryan really is leaving his mark. So I'm going to go over Ohio right after Pennsylvania, where we have the election, of course, between John Fetterman and Mehmet Oz. I'm still confident that John Fetterman is going to win this race. People who are saying that Mehmet Oz is going to come out on top, I think, are delusional. Mehmet Oz is a horrible candidate for Pennsylvania, and you see what happens when candidates run in states that have nothing to do with them. Kelly Loeffler lost to Raphael Warnock in Georgia because Kelly Loeffler had nothing to do with Georgia. She was simply rich. And Mehmet Oz, he has nothing to do with Pennsylvania. He's just famous, and of course, he's pretty wealthy as well. So John Fetterman has been Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania for the last 4 years, and he really is a very strong candidate. That's why he's doing so well in the polls. Joe Biden did not lead by this much of a lead in the 2020 presidential election, and polls are not going to be as wrong in the state as they were in 2020. Without Trump on the ballot, I think polling is going to improve this midterm cycle. Of course, Democrats are still probably going to be overestimated in many states, but it's not always that Democrats are overestimated. We've seen many times before that Republicans are actually oversampled, and one of those states is actually Nevada, where Republicans underperformed in all 2 of the major elections in 2018 in the Silver State. So Pennsylvania right now is expected to vote for John Fetterman by 6 points in the polls. His average has gone down slightly over the last couple of weeks, but he's still in a relatively strong position, and I never had Pennsylvania as a likely state. I always believed that John Fetterman was going to win by under 5%. I think right now he's going to win by around 3 to 4, but still he is going to win this seat, and it will be a big deal for Democrats as this flip will increase their chances at winning the majority significantly. And now in Ohio, I cannot overstate how terribly the GOP is doing here compared to how they should be doing. Ohio should not be a competitive race. It should be very solid for the Republican Party. It should be a state that votes to the right of Florida, and that's simply not what's happening right now. Tim Ryan is giving J.D. Vance a run for his money. Rob Portman, who won re-election in 2016 by 21%, is now retiring, and J.D. Vance is not going to see even close to a margin of that size. He's actually down in the polls right now by 0.6%, but polls in Ohio, just like they have in states like Pennsylvania and North Carolina, they have been known to overestimate Democratic support. Sherrod Brown, even though he won in 2018 in the Senate election 4 years ago, it was a big win for Democrats, as Sherrod Brown was one of the most vulnerable incumbents running for re-election that year. But polls showed Sherrod Brown up by double-digit margins pretty consistently, and so with Tim Ryan only ahead by 0.6%, the margin simply isn't high enough for me to give the race to the Democrats. However, we have seen the first A-rated pollster show Tim Ryan ahead, and that poll had him up by 3 points against Vance. This really is a pretty big deal. If we get more reputable pollsters to show Tim Ryan favored in this race, I may change my prediction, but right now, Ohio is still going to be a lean Republican state, giving Republicans their 49th seat. It's now left with just two more states, Nevada and Georgia, and as I've continuously said, these two states are going to determine the majority this November. Republicans are going to have to win both. Democrats only need one, as they currently control the vice presidency. And so just looking by the numbers, Democrats do have an advantage in both of these races. They're ahead in the polls, they've won these states in the previous election, and they also control all 4 Senate seats in these two states. So Georgia right now, we have Raphael Warnock running for re-election, and in this race, I am going to give him the victory. I do think Raphael Warnock is going to defeat Herschel Walker. It may be in a runoff, or it may not be, but I do think that Warnock is going to gain enough votes to win his first full term in office. He is significantly more popular than Joe Biden in the Peach State, and also more popular than Jon Ossoff, his counterpart. He's up by 2.1% in the polls, despite Brian Kemp destroying Stacey Abrams by 6 points on the gubernatorial level. We're seeing a significant difference between the Senate and governor races, and that's because Herschel Walker is a terrible nominee for the GOP. If Republicans had ran any more generic of a candidate, Raphael Warnock would not be returning to the Senate in 2023. And so that's why right now I have Georgia as a tilt Democratic state, giving them the 50 seats that they need. And finally, in Nevada, I am going to shift my prediction here. I do not believe that Catherine Cortez Masto is going to win her re-election at this point. I have Adam Laxalt slightly as the favored candidate, but of course these tilt ratings mean that these races could still go both ways. We still have a couple of weeks left, and things could change drastically. But right now, Nevada is not trending favorably for Masto. The 4 latest polls have all shown Adam Laxalt ahead. The Trafalgar Group has Laxalt up by 4, and this is a pretty meaningful margin. Yes, Laxalt underperformed in the governor election in 2018, but 2022 is not going to be as favorable of a year to Democrats as the year was 4 years ago. And of course, Catherine Cortez Masto is not as strong of an incumbent as Raphael Warnock, and with the addition of the fact that Adam Laxalt is not as weak of a nominee for the GOP as Herschel Walker is in Georgia, I think Nevada is a flippable seat. It's a state that's been trending more and more to the middle over the last couple of years, and Republicans right now, I think, do have a very slight edge in this race. And so this is my updated prediction for the 2022 Senate elections as of the 2nd of August, 50-50 for both parties, but this will be enough for Democrats to maintain the 50-state majority that they won in 2020 alongside the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We're only 36 days out. These elections really are approaching very fast, and so I'll keep you guys updated on this channel of the latest election-related news. And so make sure you like this video down below if you enjoyed it. Comment down below which party you think will win the majority. Do you think Democrats will flip Pennsylvania, and do you think Republicans will flip Nevada, or do you disagree with these ratings completely? Subscribe to my channel to stay updated, and I'll see you guys in the next video.